Colonel Sarah Martinez thought she was investigating a single harassment complaint. Then she discovered that female cadets at the military academy were being systematically assaulted by their instructors, and anyone who reported it was being expelled. Now she had 72 hours to expose a cover-up before the next class of victims arrived. Colonel Sarah Martinez had been at the Air Force Academy for exactly 3 weeks when the folder appeared on her desk with a yellow sticky note attached. Handle this quietly. Routine harassment complaint. Keep it internal. General Morrison. Sarah was serving as the new Deputy Inspector General, a position that involved investigating misconduct allegations and ensuring that the Academy maintained the highest standards of military conduct. It was supposed to be a prestigious assignment, a stepping stone toward her eventual promotion to Brigadier General. The folder contained a complaint filed by Cadet Amanda Chun, a second-year student at the Academy. According to the paperwork, Chun was alleging that her advanced flight training instructor, Major Robert Caldwell, had made inappropriate comments during private training sessions and had created an uncomfortable learning environment. Sarah had handled dozens of similar complaints during her career. Usually, they involved misunderstandings, poor communication, or personality conflicts that could be resolved through counseling and additional training. She expected this case to be similarly straightforward. But when she opened the file and began reading Chen's statement, Sarah felt her stomach drop. The inappropriate comments Chen described weren't misunderstandings. They were systematic sexual harassment that had escalated over months. Caldwell had started with comments about Chen's body during flight training, then progressed to unwanted physical contact during equipment demonstrations, and finally to explicit demands for sexual favors in exchange for passing grades. According to Chen's statement, when she had tried to report the harassment through official channels, she had been told by her squadron commander that female cadets need to learn to handle tough situations, and that filing complaints against instructors shows a lack of resilience that isn't suitable for military leadership. But what made Sarah's blood run cold was a note at the bottom of Chen's statement: "This is not an isolated incident. There are others." Sarah immediately called Chen's dormitory to schedule an interview, but the cadet who answered the phone told her that Chun was no longer at the academy. She had been administratively separated 3 days earlier for failure to adapt to military standards. Sarah felt a familiar chill. In her experience, cadets weren't expelled for failure to adapt, unless there were serious disciplinary issues. But Chen's academic and military performance records, which were included in the file, showed that she had been an exemplary student until the harassment began. Sarah spent the rest of the day trying to contact Chun, finally reaching her at her parents' home in California. What Chun told her over the phone made Sarah realize she wasn't dealing with a routine harassment complaint. "Colonel Martinez," Chun said, her voice shaking, "they destroyed my life for trying to report what happened. But I'm not the only one. There are at least 6 other female cadets who have been assaulted by instructors in the past 2 years. Every one of us who reported it was either expelled or forced to resign. Chun, are you willing to provide me with the names of these other cadets?" "I can try, but most of them won't talk. They're too scared, or they've been threatened, or they're just trying to move on with their lives. But Colonel, there's something else you need to know." "What?" "Major Caldwell isn't the only instructor involved. There are at least 3 other instructors who are doing the same thing. And the Academy administration knows about it." Sarah felt the weight of what Chun was telling her. This wasn't an isolated incident or a single bad instructor. This was a systematic pattern of sexual assault that was being covered up by the institution itself. "Chun, I need you to understand something. If what you're telling me is true, I'm going to investigate it fully, regardless of what my superiors want. But I need you to be absolutely certain about what you're alleging." "Colonel, I have evidence. Text messages, emails, recordings. I documented everything because I knew they would try to discredit me. And I'm willing to testify, even if it means destroying any chance I have of a military career." Sarah made a decision that would consume the next 72 hours and ultimately end her career at the academy. She told Chun to gather all her evidence and prepare for a comprehensive investigation that would expose the truth, regardless of the consequences. But first, she needed to understand the scope of what she was dealing with. Sarah spent the next day conducting what she called informal interviews with current female cadets. She couldn't conduct official investigations without authorization from General Morrison, but she could have conversations with cadets about their general experiences at the academy. What she discovered was worse than anything Chun had described. Over the course of 12 hours, Sarah spoke with 17 female cadets. Of those 17, 11 reported experiencing some form of sexual harassment or assault by academy instructors or senior cadets. The harassment ranged from inappropriate comments and unwanted touching to outright sexual assault. But more disturbing was the pattern of retaliation against cadets who tried to report the abuse. Every cadet who had filed an official complaint had faced disciplinary action, academic probation, or administrative separation. The message was clear: reporting sexual assault would end your military career. "Colonel," one cadet told her during a hushed conversation in the academy library, "we all know what happens if you report. You get labeled as a troublemaker, your grades mysteriously start dropping, and you're out of here within a semester. So most of us just try to avoid the instructors who are known problems." Known problems? Sarah asked. Everyone knows which instructors to avoid being alone with. We have informal warning systems, buddy systems for training sessions, ways to protect each other. But the academy administration pretends it doesn't know what's happening. Sarah realized she was looking at an institutional failure that went far beyond individual bad actors. The academy had created a culture where sexual assault was tolerated and victims were punished for seeking justice. That evening, Sarah received a call that changed the trajectory of her investigation. It was from Major Jennifer Walsh, the same Army physician who had worked with her during the refugee crisis. Walsh was now stationed at Walter Reed Medical Center, where she treated military personnel for various medical and psychological conditions. "Sarah," Walsh said, "I heard through channels that you're investigating sexual assault allegations at the academy. I think there's something you need to know." "What is it, Jennifer?" "I've been treating several former female cadets for PTSD and sexual trauma. They were all expelled from the academy under various pretexts, but they all have the same story. They were sexually assaulted by instructors and then kicked out when they tried to report it." "How many are we talking about?" "In the past 3 years? At least 12 that I know of personally. But Sarah, there's something else. These women aren't just dealing with trauma from the assault, they're dealing with trauma from the institutional betrayal. The academy didn't just fail to protect them, it actively punished them for being victims." Sarah felt anger building in her chest. "Jennifer, would any of these women be willing to speak with me?" "Some might. But Sarah, you need to understand what you're getting into. This isn't just about a few bad instructors. This is about an institutional culture that prioritizes protecting the academy's reputation over protecting female cadets." "I understand. But Jennifer, if we don't expose this, it's going to keep happening. The next class of female cadets arrives in 2 days, and they're walking into the same system that failed their predecessors." The next morning, Sarah received the call she had been dreading. General Morrison summoned her to his office for what he called a discussion about the Chun complaint. General Morrison was a 30-year academy graduate who had risen through the ranks to become the superintendent. He was respected throughout the Air Force for his leadership and integrity, but Sarah could see immediately that he was not pleased with her investigation. "Colonel Martinez," Morrison said, gesturing for her to sit down, "I understand you've been conducting extensive interviews about the Chun complaint. I thought I made it clear that this should be handled quietly and internally. Sir, what started as a single complaint has revealed a pattern of systematic sexual assault that affects dozens of female cadets." Morrison's expression hardened. "Colonel, I think you're overreacting to what is essentially a personality conflict between a cadet and her instructor. Major Caldwell is one of our most respected flight instructors, and Cadet Chun had documented performance issues. Sir, with respect, I've spoken with 11 current cadets who report similar experiences. I've also been in contact with former cadets who were expelled after reporting sexual assault. This isn't about personality conflicts. Colonel, you are not authorized to conduct those interviews. You were assigned to handle a single complaint, not to launch a comprehensive investigation that could damage the Academy's reputation. Sarah realized that Morrison wasn't interested in the truth. He was interested in protecting the institution. Sir, are you ordering me to end my investigation? I'm ordering you to remember that the Academy's mission is to produce Air Force officers, not to provide a platform for disgruntled former cadets to air their grievances. Major Caldwell will receive additional training on appropriate instructor-student relationships, and this matter will be considered closed. Sarah looked at the general, a man she had respected, and saw someone who was willing to sacrifice female cadets to protect an institution's reputation. Sir, I can't do that. Colonel Martinez, I'm giving you a direct order to close this investigation and file a report stating that the Chen complaint has been resolved through appropriate administrative action. And if I refuse? Morrison's voice became cold. Then you'll find that your career at this academy, and possibly in the Air Force, will be very short. Sarah left Morrison's office knowing that she had a choice to make. Follow orders and allow the systematic sexual assault of female cadets to continue, or disobey direct orders and expose a cover-up that reached the highest levels of Academy leadership. For Sarah Martinez, it wasn't really a choice at all. That evening, Sarah made a series of phone calls that would end her military career but potentially save dozens of future victims. She contacted investigative journalists, congressional representatives, and advocacy organizations that specialized in military sexual assault. But most importantly, she called Amanda Chen and the other victims she had identified, asking them to go public with their stories. Colonel Chen said, if I go public, there's no going back. I'll never have a military career, and I'll be branded as someone who couldn't handle military life. Chen, you were sexually assaulted and then punished for reporting it. That's not about your ability to handle military life. That's about an institution that failed you. But more importantly, if you stay silent, the same thing is going to happen to other young women. What about you, Colonel? What happens to your career if you expose this? Sarah looked around her academy office, at the commendations on the walls, the photos of her with military leaders, the symbols of a career she had spent 22 years building. Chen, I've had my career. You and the other victims should have had yours too. That's what we're fighting for. The story broke 72 hours later, just as the new class of cadets was arriving for orientation. The headline in the Washington Post read, Air Force Academy systematically covered up sexual assaults, expelled victims who reported abuse. The article included interviews with 15 former and current cadets, documented evidence of harassment and assault by multiple instructors, and detailed accounts of the retaliation faced by victims who tried to seek justice. The response was immediate and devastating for the Academy leadership. Congressional hearings were announced within hours. The Secretary of the Air Force was called to testify. General Morrison was relieved of command pending investigation. But most importantly, the Air Force was forced to implement immediate changes to protect female cadets and ensure that sexual assault allegations were investigated by independent authorities rather than Academy leadership. Major Caldwell and 3 other instructors were arrested on charges of sexual assault and conspiracy. An independent investigation revealed that Academy leadership had been aware of widespread sexual harassment for years, but had chosen to handle it internally to avoid negative publicity. Sarah was court-martialed for disobeying direct orders and conducting unauthorized investigations. She was found guilty and forced to retire with a letter of reprimand in her file. But she was also awarded the Secretary of Defense Medal for exceptional public service for her role in exposing institutional failures that had affected dozens of victims. 6 months after the scandal broke, Sarah stood outside the federal courthouse in Colorado Springs, watching as the last of the convicted instructors was sentenced to prison. Amanda Chen was beside her, along with 12 other women who had found the courage to testify about their experiences. Chun was now enrolled at a civilian university, studying aerospace engineering with the goal of becoming a pilot in the civilian world. She had lost her dream of a military career, but she had gained something else: the knowledge that her courage had prevented other young women from experiencing the same trauma. "Colonel Martinez," Chun said, "do you think what we did will really change things?" Sarah looked at the news report on her phone, which detailed the new policies the Air Force had implemented to prevent sexual assault and protect victims who reported abuse. Independent oversight, mandatory training, victim advocates, and clear consequences for retaliation. Chun, change is never as fast or as complete as we want it to be. But because of what you and the other victims did, the next generation of female cadets will enter an institution that is required to protect them rather than silence them. And the ones who are already there. They now know that reporting abuse won't automatically end their careers. They know that there are people outside the institution who will listen to them and fight for them. That's not everything, but it's a start. As they walked away from the courthouse, Chin asked one final question: "Do you regret giving up your career for this?" Sarah thought about the question for a moment. She had given up the possibility of becoming a general, of continuing to serve in the institution she had loved for more than 2 decades. But she had also helped expose a systematic failure that had traumatized dozens of young women and prevented them from serving their country. "Chun, I used to think that serving meant following orders and protecting the institution. But I learned something important. Sometimes the highest form of service is protecting the people the institution was supposed to protect but failed." 1 year later, Sarah received an email that made everything she had sacrificed worthwhile. It was from a young woman named Lieutenant Sarah Williams, a recent academy graduate who had commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Air Force. "Colonel Martinez," the email read, "you don't know me, but I wanted to thank you for what you did. I'm graduating from the academy this month, and I know that the reason I was able to complete my education safely was because of the changes that resulted from your investigation. I'm going to be a pilot, and I'm going to serve with honor, and none of that would have been possible without your courage." Sarah printed the email and put it in a frame on her desk, next to a photo of Chin and the other victims who had found the strength to speak truth to power. She now worked for a non-profit organization that provided legal and emotional support to victims of military sexual assault. It wasn't the career she had planned, but it was the career she had chosen, one that honored the service members who had been failed by the institution they had trusted to protect them. Today, the reforms implemented after the academy scandal have been adopted throughout the military, creating new protections for victims of sexual assault and new accountability for those who commit these crimes. Colonel Sarah Martinez learned that sometimes the most important battle isn't against foreign enemies, it's against the failures within our own institutions. Because sometimes the greatest act of patriotism is refusing to let injustice hide behind the flag.